The dusty air carried more than just the scent of horses and leather when Owen collapsed in the middle of Main Street, her violin clattering beside her as townspeople scattered like startled prairie dogs. Mitchell Hayes had been loading supplies onto his wagon when he heard the thud of her body hitting the packed earth. He dropped the sack of flour he was carrying and ran toward the crumpled figure, his boots kicking up small clouds of Colorado dust in the late summer heat of 1882. Gunnison was a town that had seen its share of troubles, from mining accidents to gunfights, but something about the way this young woman lay motionless made his chest tighten with worry he could not quite name. She was a stranger to him, though he had seen her playing violin outside the saloon for the past 3 evenings, her fingers dancing across the strings with a skill that spoke of years of practice and a passion that ran deeper than the simple need for coins. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and fanned across the dirt like spilled ink. Her skin, which had been flushed with the exertion of playing, now looked pale as milk beneath the harsh afternoon sun. Mitchell knelt beside her and placed his hand against her forehead. The heat radiating from her skin made him pull back instinctively. She was burning with fever, her body trembling despite the warmth of the day. Her eyelids fluttered but did not open. "Someone get Doc Martinez," Mitchell called out, his voice carrying the authority of a man who was used to being heard. He was 26 years old and had been working cattle since he was old enough to sit a horse, but he had never felt as helpless as he did in this moment, watching this young woman struggle against whatever illness had taken hold of her. The doctor arrived within minutes, his black bag in hand and his face grave as he examined Daniel. Mitchell stood back but did not leave, something keeping him rooted to the spot even as other townspeople began to drift away, their curiosity satisfied or their discomfort with sickness driving them back to their daily routines. "Scarlet fever," Doc Martinez said finally, his voice low enough that only Mitchell could hear. "Bad case of it, too. She needs rest and care, lots of both. You know her," Mitchell shook his head. "She has been playing music in town. I do not think she has family here." The doctor sighed, a sound heavy with the weight of too many patients and too few resources. "Sheriff says she has been staying in a room above the general store. I will have her moved there, but she will need someone to look after her. This fever, it can do strange things. Sometimes it takes the voice for weeks, sometimes longer, and if she is alone up there with no one checking on her." He did not need to finish the sentence. Mitchell understood what happened to sick people who had no one to care for them, especially in a frontier town where everyone was too busy trying to survive to worry much about strangers. "I will check on her," Mitchell heard himself say, the words coming out before he had fully thought them through. "I can bring food, make sure she has what she needs." Doc Martinez looked at him with surprise and something that might have been approval. "That is good of you, Hayes. Real good. Just be careful. Scarlet fever is not something to take lightly." They carried Daniel up the narrow stairs to her room, and Mitchell got his first real look at the space she had been living in. It was small and sparse, with just a bed, a washstand, and a trunk that probably held everything she owned. Her violin case sat in the corner, and sheet music was scattered across the small table by the window. The room smelled of lemon oil and the faint sweetness of rosin. Doc Martinez settled her into the bed and left Mitchell with a list of instructions and a bottle of medicine. "Get fluids in her when you can. The fever needs to break, and that could take days. Keep her cool with wet cloths, and if she gets worse, you come get me immediately, understand?" Mitchell nodded, already wondering what exactly he had gotten himself into. He was a cowboy, a man who understood horses and cattle and the language of the open range. What did he know about caring for a sick woman? But when he looked at Daniel, At the way her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, and the way her fingers twitched as if still playing music in her dreams, he knew he could not walk away. The first night was the hardest. The fever raged through her body, making her thrash and mumble words he could not understand. Mitchell sat in the chair beside her bed, cooling her forehead with damp cloths and trying to get spoonfuls of water past her cracked lips. He had sent word to the ranch where he worked that he would be delayed, and his boss, understanding the situation, had given him a week to sort things out. By the second day, the fever had not broken, but Daniel had fallen into a deeper sleep, her body exhausted from fighting. Mitchell found himself studying her face in the dim light that filtered through the curtains. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with the conventional prettiness he had seen in other women. There was character in her features, a strength in the set of her jaw even in sleep, and an intelligence in the fine lines around her eyes that spoke of someone who saw the world clearly and without illusion. He learned her name from the letters he found in her trunk, though he felt guilty about looking through her things. Daniel Owen from Boston, Massachusetts. 23 years old, if the dates on the letters were accurate. She had been traveling west for reasons the letters only hinted at. Something about needing a fresh start and wanting to see the country her music teacher had always talked about. There were no mentions of family, no references to anyone who might be looking for her or waiting for her somewhere. On the third day, her eyes opened for the first time. Mitchell was dozing in his chair, his hat pulled low over his face, when he heard a small sound. He looked up to find her watching him with eyes the color of storm clouds, confused and frightened. "You are safe," he said quickly, leaning forward. "You have been sick. Do you remember collapsing in the street?" She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Her eyes widened with panic, and she tried again, her lips forming words that had no sound. Her hand flew to her throat, and tears began to stream down her face. "Easy now," Mitchell said, his voice gentle in a way that surprised even him. "Doc Martinez said this might happen. The fever, it can take your voice for a while, but it will come back. You just need to rest and get your strength up." Daniel did not look convinced. She tried again to speak, her frustration obvious in every line of her body. When still no sound came, she let out a silent sob that tore at Mitchell's heart. He reached for the slate and chalk that Doc Martinez had left, just in case. "Here," he said, placing them in her hands. "You can write what you need to tell me." Her fingers trembled as she gripped the chalk, and for a moment Mitchell thought she might be too weak. But then she began to write, the letters shaky but legible. "Who are you, Mitchell Hayes?" he said. "I am the one who found you when you fell. I have been helping take care of you while you have been sick." She wrote again, faster this time. "How long? 3 days. The fever was bad, but you are getting better now." Daniel looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time, taking in the evidence of Mitchell's presence. His coat hung on the back of the chair, his bedroll was spread in the corner where he had been sleeping, and a basket of food sat on the table. She wrote quickly, her eyes filling with tears again. "You stayed." "Someone had to," Mitchell said, trying to keep his tone light. "Besides, I wanted to hear you play that violin again. Cannot do that if you are dead." A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, and Mitchell felt an odd sense of triumph at having put it there. She wrote again, slower this time, as if the effort was tiring her. "Thank you." "You are welcome. Now you need to drink some water and try to eat something. Doc Martinez left some broth, and I am a fair hand at warming things up, even if I cannot cook worth a damn." Over the next several days, a strange routine developed between them. Mitchell would arrive in the mornings with fresh water and whatever food he could manage to prepare or buy from the restaurant down the street. Daniel was weak and could not do much beyond sitting up for short periods, but she was awake more and more as the fever slowly released its grip on her. Without her voice, they communicated through her slate and through gestures. Mitchell discovered that Daniel was witty and sharp, her written responses often making him laugh out loud. She asked him questions about Gunnison, about his work on the cattle ranch, about his life. He found himself telling her things he had never shared with anyone, about growing up in Texas before his family moved to Colorado, about losing his parents to illness when he was 19, about the loneliness that sometimes crept up on him when he was out on the range with nothing but cattle and stars for company. Daniel, in turn, wrote about Boston, about studying music at a conservatory, about the scandal that had driven her west. She had been engaged to a man her family approved of, a wealthy merchant twice her age. But she had fallen in love with her music teacher, a married man who had encouraged her talent and her dreams. When the affair was discovered, though Daniel insisted nothing improper had actually happened, her reputation was destroyed. The engagement was broken, her family disowned her, and she had taken what little money she had and headed west, hoping to make a living with her violin and her voice. "I sang too," she wrote on the slate one afternoon when Mitchell had asked about the sheet music. "Before the fever." "You will sing again," Mitchell said with a confidence he did not quite feel. "Voices come back. Doc Martinez said so." Daniel did not look convinced, but she nodded, and Mitchell saw something in her eyes that might have been hope or might have been fear. He was learning to read her expressions, the way her eyebrows drew together when she was worried, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she was amused by something he said, the way her whole face softened when she looked out the window at the mountains in the distance. It was on the 8th day, when the fever had finally broken completely, and Daniel was strong enough to sit in the chair by the window, that Mitchell realized he was in trouble. He had come to her room that morning with fresh bread and jam, and he had found her standing at the window, one hand pressed against the glass as she watched the town wake up below. The morning light had turned her hair to gold and shadow, and when she turned to look at him, the smile that lit her face had hit him like a physical blow. He was falling in love with her. It was a ridiculous thought. He barely knew her. They had spent little more than a week together, and most of that time she had been too sick to do more than sleep. But he could not deny the way his heart lifted every time he saw her, the way he found himself thinking about her when he should have been thinking about work, the way he wanted to tell her every small detail of his day just to see her write her responses and watch her eyes light up with interest or concern. Mitchell had been in love before, or at least he had thought so. There had been a girl in Texas, a rancher's daughter with red hair and a temper to match. But that had been a young man's infatuation, all heat and no substance. This was different. This felt like something that could last, something that could grow into the kind of love his parents had shared before illness took them. But he had no idea if Daniel felt the same way. She was grateful to him, that much was clear, but gratitude was not love. And even if she did have feelings for him, how could he ask her to stay in Gunnison when she had been planning to keep moving west, to California maybe, where opportunities for musicians might be better? He pushed those thoughts aside and focused on helping her recover. Doc Martinez visited every few days and pronounced himself satisfied with her progress. The scarlet fever had run its course, leaving Daniel weak but alive. Her voice, however, showed no signs of returning. "Give it time," the doctor said when Daniel wrote frantically on her slate about whether she would ever speak again. "I have seen this before. The fever can affect the vocal cords, make them swell and strain, but with rest and patience, most people recover their voices. It might be weeks, might be a month or more, but I have faith it will come back." Daniel did not look reassured, but she nodded and thanked him with a written note. After he left, She sat at the window and stared out at the mountains, her shoulders slumped with a defeat that Mitchell ached to ease. "You know," he said, pulling his chair close to hers, "I have been thinking. You have been cooped up in this room for over a week now. What do you say we get you outside for a bit? The fresh air might do you good, and I can show you some of the prettier spots around town." Daniel turned to look at him, surprise evident in her expression. She reached for her slate. "I am not sure I am strong enough." "We will take it slow," Mitchell promised. "And if you get tired, I will carry you back myself, but I think you need to see something other than these four walls." She hesitated, then nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. Mitchell helped her stand, steady hand at her elbow, and he felt the tremor that ran through her body. She was still weak, but she was determined, and he admired that about her. They made their way slowly down the stairs and out into the afternoon sunshine. Gunnison was busy with the usual activity of a mining town, people coming and going from the stores and saloons, wagons rattling down the street, horses tied to hitching posts. Several people stopped to stare at Daniel, and Mitchell could see the curiosity and speculation in their eyes. By tomorrow, the whole town would probably be talking about the sick violin player and the cowboy who had been caring for her. Mitchell led her away from the main street, toward the creek that ran along the edge of town. There was a spot he knew, shaded by cottonwoods and quiet enough that they could sit and talk without being interrupted. Daniel walked slowly, her hand light on his arm, and he matched his pace to hers in no hurry to rush. When they reached the creek, Daniel sank onto the grass with obvious relief, and Mitchell settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The water burbled over smooth stones, and somewhere in the trees, a bird sang its late summer song. Daniel reached for the slate she had brought and wrote, "This is beautiful. Thank you for bringing me here." "I come here sometimes when I need to think," Mitchell said, picking up a smooth pebble and turning it over in his fingers. "It is peaceful, reminds me that there is more to life than work and worry." Daniel nodded and wrote again, "I have not thanked you properly for everything you have done. I would have died without you." "You do not need to thank me," Mitchell said, his voice rough with emotion he was trying to hide. "I did what anyone would have done." Daniel shook her head emphatically and underlined what she wrote next. "No, most people would have walked away. You stayed. You cared. That means something." Mitchell did not know what to say to that, so he just nodded, his throat tight. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the creek and watching the sunlight filter through the leaves. It was Daniel who broke the silence, writing on her slate and holding it up for him to see. "Tell me about your ranch. What is it like?" Mitchell found himself describing the Rolling H Ranch where he worked, the sprawling acres of grassland that turned gold in the summer and white in the winter, the herd of cattle that he and the other cowboys tended, the big main house where the owner lived with his family, and the bunkhouse where Mitchell shared space with 5 other men. He talked about the work, the long days in the saddle, the satisfaction of bringing in a healthy calf or breaking a wild horse to ride. "It sounds wonderful," Daniel wrote. "Do you love it?" Mitchell considered the question. "I love parts of it. I love being outside, working with the animals, the freedom of it. But it can be lonely too, and I have been thinking lately that maybe I want something more, a place of my own someday maybe. A family." He had not meant to say that last part, and he felt his face heat with embarrassment. But when he glanced at Daniel, she was looking at him with such warmth and understanding that his embarrassment faded. She wrote slowly, as if choosing her words carefully. "I think you would make a wonderful father. You are kind and patient. Any child would be lucky to have you." "And you?" Mitchell asked before he could stop himself. "Do you want a family someday?" Daniel's expression turned wistful, and she was a long time writing her response. "I always thought I would, but I also thought I would have my music, my career. In Boston, they told me I could not have both, that I had to choose between being an artist and being a wife and mother. I came west thinking maybe out here, where things are less rigid, I could find a way to have both. But now, without my voice. She trailed off, the slate remaining blank. You will get your voice back, Mitchell said firmly. And even if you do not, you still have your violin. I heard you play, remember? You do not need words to make music that touches people's souls. Daniel's eyes filled with tears, and before Mitchell could think better of it, he reached out and took her hand. Her fingers curled around his, warm and strong despite her recent illness, and for a long moment they just sat there, hands linked, while the creek sang its endless song. The days that followed established a new rhythm. Mitchell still came every morning, but now Daniel was well enough to do more than just sit and rest. She started playing her violin again, soft melodies at first, as if she was afraid of disturbing anyone. But as her strength returned, the music grew bolder, more confident. Mitchell would sit and listen, marveling at the way she could make the instrument sing and weep and laugh in the afternoons. They would walk, venturing a little farther each day. Mitchell showed her the places he loved in and around Gunnison. The meadow where wildflowers bloomed in a riot of color, the overlook where you could see the whole valley spread out below, the abandoned mine shaft that was rumored to be haunted. Daniel brought her slate everywhere, and their conversations, though one-sided in terms of spoken words, felt deeper and more meaningful than most of the small talk Mitchell had engaged in throughout his life. He learned that she loved thunderstorms and fresh bread and the way horses smelled. She was terrified of spiders but thought snakes were beautiful. She had read more books than Mitchell had even known existed, and she had strong opinions about everything from politics to poetry. She made him laugh with her observations about the townspeople, little sketches in words that captured the essence of the blacksmith's daughter who was sweet on the banker's son, or the shopkeeper who watered down his whiskey but charged full price. In return, Mitchell taught her about the land, how to read the weather in the clouds and the behavior of animals, how to identify the tracks of different creatures, how to find water in the dry country. He taught her to play poker one rainy afternoon, and she beat him 3 hands in a row, her silent laughter making his heart ache with feelings he was no longer trying to deny. It was on one of their walks, nearly 3 weeks after Daniel had first fallen ill, that things changed between them. They had hiked up to a ridge that overlooked the town, and they were sitting on a flat rock, sharing an apple that Mitchell had brought. The autumn was coming on, and there was a crispness in the air that spoke of the cold months ahead. Daniel had been quiet, or rather, more withdrawn than usual. She had not been writing as much, and her eyes kept drifting to the horizon as if she was searching for something Mitchell could not see. "What is wrong?" he asked finally, unable to bear the distance he felt growing between them. She picked up her slate but hesitated before writing. When she finally put chalk to stone, her letters were small and uncertain. "I have been here almost a month. I should be moving on soon." The words hit Mitchell like a punch to the gut. He had known this moment was coming, had been dreading it since he first realized his feelings for her, but having it stated so plainly made it real in a way he was not prepared for. "Why?" he asked, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "Your voice has not come back yet. Doc Martinez said you should stay until it does." "My voice might never come back," Daniel wrote, her hand shaking slightly. "I cannot stay here forever, living off your charity and taking up your time. You have your own life, your own work, and I need to figure out what comes next for me." "What if I do not want you to go?" Mitchell said, the words tumbling out before he could think about them. "What if I want you to stay?" Daniel stared at him, her eyes wide. She started to write something, then erased it with her sleeve and started again. Mitchell, you have been so kind to me. But you do not owe me anything more. You have already done so much. This is not about owing, Mitchell said, frustration and fear making his words sharp. This is about, damn it, Daniel, I am trying to tell you that I have feelings for you, real feelings. The kind that do not go away just because you move on to the next town. For a long moment, Daniel just looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then she wrote, her hand moving quickly across the slate. You do not know what you are saying. You have been taking care of me while I have been sick. That creates a bond, but it is not the same as love. Do not tell me what I feel, Mitchell said, his voice low and intense. I know the difference between obligation and love. I have spent the last 3 weeks getting to know you, the real you, not just the woman who needed help. I know how your eyes light up when you talk about music. I know you hate being cold, but you love the snow. I know you are brave and stubborn and funny and smart, and I know that I have never met anyone who makes me feel the way you do. Daniel's hands were shaking as she wrote her response. I care about you too, more than I should. But Mitchell, I am broken. My voice might not come back. My career, everything I worked for, it might be over. I do not want you to tie yourself to someone who might spend the rest of her life unable to speak. Then we will learn to talk without words, Mitchell said, reaching out to take her hand. We have been doing it for weeks now. Your slate, your eyes, your expressions. I can read you, Daniel. Sometimes I think I can read you better than I could if you were talking. Tears were streaming down Daniel's face now, and she made no move to wipe them away. She wrote with her free hand, the letters large and emphatic. What if you regret it? What if you wake up one day and wish you had chosen someone whole? You are whole, Mitchell said fiercely. You are more whole than anyone I have ever met. You survived an illness that could have killed you. You left everything you knew to make a new life out here. You make beautiful music that brings tears to people's eyes. You are funny and kind and strong. Do not let anyone, including yourself, tell you that you are broken just because you cannot speak right now. Daniel dropped her slate and threw herself into his arms, her silent sobs shaking her whole body. Mitchell held her tight, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring comfort even though he knew she could not respond with words. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. When Daniel finally pulled back, her face was blotchy from crying, but there was something different in her eyes, something softer, more open. She picked up her slate and wrote, I love you too. I think I have loved you since I woke up and saw you sleeping in that chair, this stranger who had stayed by my bedside. Mitchell felt his heart swell so big he thought it might burst. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumb gently wiping away the last of her tears. Can I kiss you? Daniel nodded, and when their lips met, it was like coming home to a place Mitchell had been searching for his whole life. The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise, and when they broke apart, both of them were smiling. They walked back to town hand in hand as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. People stared, and Mitchell knew the gossip would be flying before they even made it back to the boarding house, but he did not care. Let them talk. He had found something precious, something rare, and he was not going to let it go because of what other people might think. The next few weeks were both wonderful and challenging. Mitchell had to return to work at the ranch, but he came to town every chance he got. Daniel had moved out of the room above the general store and into a small house at the edge of town that she rented with some of the money she had been saving. She gave violin lessons to children in the afternoons and played at the saloon in the evenings, though without her voice to sing. She could only provide instrumental music. Mitchell worried about her, living alone and still voiceless, but Daniel proved herself more than capable. She had rigged up a system of signs in her house, so that if she needed help, she could hang a red cloth in the window and someone would come check on her. She had made friends with several of the townswomen, including the doctor's wife, who stopped by regularly to visit and bring food. But the thing that worried Mitchell most was the sadness he sometimes saw in Daniel's eyes when she thought he was not looking. She was adapting to life without her voice, but he knew it cost her. She had been a singer as well as a violinist, and music had been her whole life. Losing half of that must have felt like losing a limb. It was early October when things came to a head. Mitchell had managed to get a whole day off, and he had planned a picnic for Daniel at their favorite spot by the creek. He arrived at her house with a basket of food and a blanket, only to find her sitting at her kitchen table, her violin in pieces in front of her. "What happened?" he asked, alarm flooding through him. Daniel looked up and he could see she had been crying. She picked up her slate. "I dropped it. I was putting it back in its case and my hands were shaking and I dropped it. One of the strings broke and I think something inside is loose. I can hear it rattling." Mitchell knelt beside her, examining the violin. He did not know much about musical instruments, but even he could see that the damage was not catastrophic. "Can it be fixed?" "Maybe," Daniel wrote. "But the nearest person who could repair it properly is in Denver. That is a 2-day journey, and I do not know if I can afford it right now." Mitchell made a decision in that moment, one that he knew was right even if it was impulsive. "Then we will go to Denver, together. I have some money saved and I will talk to my boss about taking a week off. We will get your violin fixed, and while we are there, we will see a doctor about your voice, a specialist, someone who might know more than Doc Martinez." Daniel stared at him. "Mitchell, I cannot ask you to do that. You are not asking, I am offering. Actually, I am insisting. We are in this together now, remember. Your problems are my problems." Fresh tears spilled down Daniel's cheeks, but she was smiling as she wrote, "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "I think I am the lucky one," Mitchell said, leaning in to kiss her forehead. "Now pack what you need. We leave tomorrow." The journey to Denver took 3 days instead of 2 because they traveled by wagon rather than horseback, wanting to make sure the violin was as protected as possible. They camped at night under the stars, and Mitchell taught Daniel how to make coffee over a campfire and how to tell direction by the North Star. Daniel taught Mitchell some basic musical notation, scratching notes in the dirt with a stick, and then whistling the melodies for him to hear. Denver was bigger than Gunnison, more settled and sophisticated. They found a reputable violin maker on their second day in the city, an elderly German man who spoke broken English but whose eyes lit up when he saw Daniel's instrument. "This is good violin," he said, running his fingers over the wood with reverence. "Very good. I can fix, no problem. You come back in 2 days." With the violin taken care of, Mitchell and Daniel turned their attention to finding a doctor who specialized in throat ailments. They were directed to a physician named Dr. Catherine Wells, one of the few female doctors in Denver, who had studied in Europe and had a reputation for treating difficult cases. Dr. Wells examined Daniel thoroughly, using instruments to look down her throat and asking her to try to make various sounds. Daniel complied, though Mitchell could see the frustration on her face when nothing but air came out. "The vocal cords are inflamed, Doctor," Wells said finally, "but I do not see permanent damage. The scarlet fever caused significant swelling, and sometimes the body needs time to heal completely before the voice returns. I am going to give you some exercises to do every day, gentle stretches and attempts at sound that will help strengthen the muscles without straining them. I am also going to prescribe a tea that you should drink 3 times a day. It will help reduce inflammation." "How long before her voice comes back?" Mitchell asked when Daniel looked too overwhelmed to write the question. "It is hard to say," Dr. Wells admitted. "Could be days, could be weeks. But I am optimistic. With time and proper care, I believe Miss Owen will sing again." They left the doctor's office with a glimmer of hope that had been missing for weeks. Daniel was silent on the walk back to their hotel, but when they reached their room, she threw her arms around Mitchell and held him tight. "We are going to get through this," Mitchell murmured into her hair. "I promise you, we are going to get through this together." They spent one more day in Denver, exploring the city and enjoying the luxury of time together without the pressure of work or worry. Mitchell bought Daniel a new dress, a beautiful deep green that matched her eyes, and she wrote that she felt like a princess when she wore it. They had dinner at a fancy restaurant, and though Daniel could not tell him what she thought of the food, her expression said everything. They walked through the city parks hand in hand, and Mitchell realized that he could see a future with this woman, a real future that extended beyond the next day or week or month. On their last evening in Denver, as they sat in their hotel room watching the sun set over the mountains, Daniel wrote him a long letter on several pieces of paper she had bought. Mitchell read it slowly, savoring every word. "Mitchell," it began, "I need you to know how much these past weeks have meant to me. When I left Boston, I thought I was running away from failure and scandal. I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone, trying to make a living with my music and never really belonging anywhere. But then I got sick and you found me, and everything changed. You did not just save my life. You gave me a reason to want to live again. You showed me that I could be loved for who I am, not for what I can do or what I can offer. You have been patient with me when I have been frustrated, kind when I have been difficult, and loving when I have felt most unlovable. I do not know what the future holds or whether my voice will ever return, but I know that I want to face that future with you. If you will have me, I would like to stay in Gunnison. I would like to build a life there with you. I love you, Mitchell Hayes, more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person. Thank you for teaching me to communicate without words, and for learning to read my heart when my voice could not speak for it." Mitchell's eyes were wet by the time he finished reading. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his pocket, then pulled Daniel into his arms. "I will have you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after that, I love you, Daniel Owen, and I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that." They returned to Gunnison with the repaired violin and renewed hope. Daniel threw herself into her exercises, doing them faithfully 3 times a day, as Dr. Wells had instructed. Mitchell could see the determination in her eyes, but he could also see the disappointment every time she tried to make sound and nothing came. "Do not push too hard," he would tell her, gently taking her hands when he saw her getting frustrated. "It will happen when it is ready to happen." Life in Gunnison settled into a comfortable rhythm. Mitchell had spoken to his boss at the ranch about his intentions toward Daniel, and to his surprise, the older man had been supportive. "It is about time you found yourself a good woman," Mr. Henderson had said, clapping Mitchell on the shoulder. "You have been moping around here like a lost calf for too long. Bring her by sometime. My wife would love to meet her." Daniel continued to give violin lessons and play at the saloon, though she had also started playing for church services on Sunday mornings. The pastor had been hesitant at first, wondering if it was proper for a woman who played in saloons to also play in church. But after hearing her perform, he had been convinced. Daniel's music had a spiritual quality to it, especially when she played hymns, that moved people in ways words never could. It was late October, nearly 6 weeks after Daniel had first lost her voice, when the miracle happened. Mitchell had come to her house for dinner, and Daniel had made a stew that actually tasted good, which was a significant improvement over her earlier attempts at cooking. They were washing dishes together, comfortable in the domestic routine they had developed, when Daniel suddenly stopped. Mitchell looked over at her and saw that her hand was pressed to her throat, her eyes wide. "What is wrong?" he asked immediately, concerned. Daniel opened her mouth and a sound came out. It was barely more than a whisper, hoarse and uncertain, but it was unmistakably a voice. Her voice. "Mitchell," she said, and the word was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. He dropped the plate he was holding, not even caring when it shattered on the floor, and pulled her into his arms. Daniel was crying and laughing at the same time, trying to say his name again and again, each time a little stronger. "Say something else," Mitchell urged, his own eyes wet with tears. "Say anything." "I love you," Daniel whispered, her voice raw but real. "I love you, I love you, I love you." They stood in her kitchen, holding each other and laughing and crying as Daniel's voice gradually grew stronger. It was rough at first, and she could not speak for long without needing to rest, but it was there. Her voice had come back. Over the next several days, Daniel slowly regained full use of her voice. She did her exercises religiously and drank the tea Dr. Wells had prescribed, and with each passing day, she could speak a little longer and a little more clearly. Mitchell had never seen her so happy, and it filled him with a joy that was almost painful in its intensity. 2 weeks later, on a crisp November evening, Daniel sang for the first time since her illness. It was at the saloon, and word had spread that she was going to attempt it, so the place was packed with townspeople who had grown fond of the quiet violin player with the expressive eyes. Mitchell stood at the back, his heart in his throat as Daniel positioned herself on the small stage with her violin. She looked nervous, and he wanted nothing more than to rush up there and hold her hand, but he knew she needed to do this on her own. She played a few bars on the violin, letting the music settle the room, and then she began to sing. Her voice was different than it had been before the fever, slightly deeper and with a roughness around the edges that had not been there. But it was beautiful, hauntingly so, and the song she had chosen, a ballad about lost love and redemption, brought tears to more than a few eyes in the audience. When she finished, the saloon erupted in applause. Daniel's face was flushed with triumph and relief, and her eyes immediately sought Mitchell's across the room. He pushed through the crowd to get to her, and when he reached her, he swept her up in his arms and spun her around. "You were amazing," he said when he finally set her down. "You are amazing." "My voice is different," Daniel said, and he could hear the uncertainty in her tone. "It is not as strong as it was, not as clear." "It is perfect," Mitchell said firmly. "It is your voice, and it is perfect." That night, as they walked back to Daniel's house under a sky full of stars, Mitchell asked the question that had been burning in his heart for weeks. "Marry me," he said, stopping in the middle of the street and taking both of her hands in his. "I do not have a ring yet, and I know this is not the romantic proposal you probably imagined, but I cannot wait another day to ask you. Marry me, Daniel. Build a life with me. Have a family with me. Grow old with me. I promise I will spend every day trying to make you as happy as you have made me." Daniel was crying again, but she was smiling through the tears. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Yes, yes, yes. I will marry you, Mitchell Hayes." They were married 3 weeks later on a cold December day when snow was just beginning to fall. The ceremony was held in the small church where Daniel played violin, and it seemed like half the town turned out to witness it. Daniel wore her green dress from Denver, and Mitchell wore his best suit, which he had to borrow from Mr. Henderson because he did not own one himself. Doc Martinez walked Daniel down the aisle since she had no family present, and Mitchell thought he had never seen anything more beautiful than the sight of her coming toward him, her eyes shining with love and happiness. They exchanged vows that they had written themselves, promising to love and support each other through sickness and health, through joy and sorrow, through words and silence. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Mitchell kissed his bride as snow began to fall in earnest outside the church windows. The congregation cheered, and someone started playing the piano, and the whole thing felt like something out of a dream. They had a simple reception at the saloon, with food that the townswomen had prepared and music provided by Daniel and several other local musicians. Mitchell danced with his wife for the first time, holding her close as she hummed along with the music, and he thought about how far they had both come in the few short months since he had found her collapsed in the street. Mr. Henderson had given them a wedding present that took their breath away, a small parcel of land on the edge of his property, along with enough lumber to build a house. "You have been a good worker and a loyal friend," the rancher had said when he handed Mitchell the deed. "And I figure if you have your own place, you are more likely to stick around. Besides, my wife is already planning how she is going to help with your babies when they come along." Mitchell and Daniel spent the winter building their house with help from the other ranch hands and several townspeople who had become friends. It was hard work, and there were days when Mitchell wondered if they were crazy to try to build a house in the middle of winter, but Daniel's determination was infectious. She worked alongside the men, hammering nails and hauling boards, her cheeks flushed with cold and exertion. By early spring, the house was finished. It was small but solid, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a sitting room, and a front porch that looked out toward the mountains. Daniel cried when she first walked through the finished house, running her hands over the walls and the furniture they had bought or built. "It is ours," she kept saying, as if she could not quite believe it. "It is really ours." They moved in on a bright April morning when the wildflowers were just starting to bloom. Mitchell carried Daniel over the threshold, both of them laughing, and they spent their first night in their own home lying on a blanket in front of the fireplace, talking about their plans and dreams. Daniel continued to teach music lessons and play at the church, and occasionally at the saloon. Her voice had healed completely, though it retained that slight roughness that Mitchell had come to love, because it reminded him of how far she had come and how strong she was. She sang while she worked in the garden they had planted, while she cooked dinner, while she sat on the porch in the evenings watching the sunset. Mitchell never tired of hearing her voice. He continued to work at the Rolling H Ranch, but now he came home every night to his own house and his own wife. It was a good life, better than he had ever imagined having. In late summer, Daniel told him she was pregnant. She was nervous about it, worried that she would not be a good mother or that something would go wrong, but Mitchell held her and told her everything would be fine. "You are the strongest person I know," he said, "and you are going to be an amazing mother. Our child is lucky to have you." The pregnancy was not easy. Daniel was sick for the first few months, and Mitchell spent many mornings holding her hair while she was ill, bringing her dry crackers and ginger tea. But she never complained, and as her belly grew, so did her joy. They spent the winter preparing for the baby, knitting tiny clothes and building a cradle. Mr. Henderson's wife, Martha, came by regularly to check on Daniel and to give advice. Doc Martinez visited once a week to make sure everything was progressing normally. The baby came in early March, during a late winter storm that dumped 2 feet of snow on Gunnison overnight. Mitchell rode through the blizzard to fetch Doc Martinez, his heart in his throat with worry. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Mitchell thought he might lose his mind from helplessness as he listened to Daniel's cries from the bedroom. But when it was over and Doc Martinez placed a squirming, crying baby boy in his arms, Mitchell forgot everything except the overwhelming love that flooded through him. His son. He had a son. "He is perfect," Daniel said from the bed, her voice weak but happy. "Is he not perfect?" "He is," Mitchell agreed, carefully carrying the baby over to show his wife. "He is absolutely perfect." They named him Matthew Owen Hayes, and from the moment he entered the world, he owned both of his parents completely. Mitchell had thought he understood love when he married Daniel, but becoming a father opened up whole new dimensions of the emotion. He would do anything for this tiny person, would fight off any threat, would work until his hands bled to provide for him. Daniel took to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. She nursed Matthew while she practiced her violin, sang to him constantly, and seemed to know instinctively what he needed even when he was too young to tell her. Mitchell would often come home from work to find her dancing around the kitchen with Matthew in her arms, both of them laughing. The years that followed were full and rich. Matthew grew into a curious, energetic boy who loved horses and music in equal measure. When he was 3, Daniel became pregnant again, and this time she carried the baby with more ease and confidence. Their daughter, Mary, was born on a warm May evening with far less drama than Matthew's birth had involved. She had her mother's eyes and her father's dark hair, and she was as loud and opinionated as her brother was quiet and thoughtful. Mitchell expanded his work, buying some cattle of his own and building up a small herd on the land that Henderson had given them. Daniel taught music to half the children in Gunnison and performed regularly at community events. Together, they were building something that would last, a legacy for their children and their children's children. On a warm evening in late summer, when Matthew was 5 and Mary was 2, the whole family sat on their front porch watching the sun set over the mountains. The children were playing with a pair of kittens that had taken up residence in their barn, and Daniel was leaning against Mitchell's shoulder, her hand in his. "You remember," she said softly, "when we first met, when I could not speak and you had to learn to read my eyes." "I remember," Mitchell said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I remember thinking I had never seen eyes more expressive than yours. I was so frightened," Daniel continued. "Frightened that I would never speak again, that I would never sing again, that I would spend the rest of my life alone and broken." "You were never broken," Mitchell said firmly. "Not for one single moment." Daniel smiled and turned to look at him. "No," she agreed. "I suppose I was not. Because you saw me, really saw me, even when I could not speak. You learned my language and you taught me yours, and you showed me that love does not need words to be real." "I love you," Mitchell said, as he had said countless times over the years. "I will love you until the day I die and probably beyond that." "I love you too," Daniel said, and then she laughed as Mary came running up to the porch, dragging a very patient kitten behind her. "Mama, Papa, look," the little girl said proudly. "Kitty is dancing." They watched as Mary made the kitten stand on its hind legs, and Mitchell thought about how much his life had changed since that day when he had seen a young woman collapse in the street. He had been a lonely cowboy with no real plans beyond the next day's work, and now he was a husband, a father, a landowner, a man with roots and purpose, and a future that stretched out before him full of possibility. The fever had taken Daniel's voice for a month, but in that month, Mitchell had learned to read her eyes, her expressions, her very soul. And in learning to see her without the filter of words, he had found the love of his life. They stayed on that porch until the stars came out and Matthew started yawning and Mary fell asleep in Daniel's arms. Mitchell carried his daughter inside and tucked her into bed, then did the same for Matthew. When he came back out to the porch, Daniel was still there, her violin in her hands, playing a soft melody that floated out across the darkened fields. Mitchell sat down beside her and listened, as he had listened so many times before, and he thought about the music they had made together, not just the songs she played but the life they had built. It was a beautiful symphony, full of joy and sorrow, challenge and triumph, silence and sound. And it was far from over. There would be more children, more challenges, more years of work and love and building. There would be hard times, he knew, because life always had hard times. But they would face them together, as they had faced everything since that first day when fate and fever had brought them together. "Come to bed," Daniel said finally, setting down her violin. "Tomorrow is Sunday, and I need to practice the hymns I am playing for church." Mitchell took her hand and let her lead him inside their house, their home, the place where their love story was still being written. And as he closed the door behind them, he sent up a silent prayer of thanks for fevers and fainting, and all the unexpected ways that life could change in a single moment. Because sometimes the greatest blessings came disguised as disasters, and sometimes you had to lose your voice to truly be heard. Years later, when Matthew and Mary were grown with families of their own, and Mitchell and Daniel were gray-haired and moving slower but no less in love, they would sit on that same porch and tell their grandchildren the story of how they met. "Your grandmother collapsed right in the middle of Main Street," Mitchell would say, his eyes twinkling. "And I picked her up and carried her inside, and that was that. I was done for. The fever took my voice for a month," Daniel would add, her hand finding Mitchell's as naturally as breathing. "But your grandfather learned to read my eyes instead. He learned my heart, and that is how I knew he was the one." The grandchildren would ask for the story again and again, never tiring of the tale of the cowboy and the musician, the fever and the loss, the love that grew in silence and bloomed into a lifetime. And every time they told it, Mitchell would look at his wife and remember that moment in the doctor's office when she had whispered his name for the first time after weeks of silence. He would remember the way her voice had sounded, rough and uncertain but unmistakably hers. He would remember the feel of her hand in his, the taste of her tears, the sound of her laughter. He would remember all of it, every single precious moment, and he would thank God or fate or whatever force had brought them together. Because Daniel Owen Hayes was the best thing that had ever happened to him, and their love story was one worth remembering. The sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and on the porch of a small house in Gunnison, Colorado, two people who had found each other against all odds held hands and watched the day fade into night. They did not need words anymore, though they had them in abundance. They had something deeper, something that transcended language. They had love, pure and simple and strong enough to weather any storm. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. The fever had taken her voice for a month, but the cowboy had learned to read her eyes instead. And in doing so, he had learned to read her heart, and she had learned to read his. They had built a language all their own, one written in glances and touches, in music and silence, in the everyday moments that made up a life well lived. It was a love story for the ages, played out against the backdrop of the Wild West, where life was hard and survival was never guaranteed. But they had survived and they had thrived, and they had created something beautiful together. As night fell completely and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Mitchell pulled Daniel close and kissed her forehead. She smiled up at him, her eyes still as expressive and beautiful as they had been the first day he had looked into them and seen his future reflected there. "I love you," he said, as he had said 10,000 times before and would say 10,000 times more. "I love you too," she replied, her voice warm and full of all the years they had shared. "Always and forever." And that was the truest thing either of them would ever say.